More on the story now, the Prime Minister having received the Defence Strategic Review this afternoon. We're going to get some immediate analysis with the Foreign Editor at the Australian, Greg Sheridan, who joins me every week on the program. He's live in the studio with me today. Greg, a big day in defence terms. The government says it's the biggest, most significant review since the DIB review of 1986. Do you agree with that assessment?
Look, I do, Kieran. I think this is a red letter day in Australian history. I would, so let me overboom the government here. I think this is the most important defence review since World War II because we've never been in a more perilous situation than World War II. So what the review recommends and what the Albanese government does determines our capacity to provide for our own security in the next critical 10 to 15 years.
Very interesting comments by Angus Houston and the Prime Minister when they were handing over the report. One, Angus Houston said this is the most important piece of work he's done within defence in his career. This is a former Chief of Defence for 6 years, a former Head of the Air Force for 4 years, and this report is the most important job that he's done, he said. Then the Prime Minister saying, importantly, that he's been kept up to speed with the review as they've gone along. So he and the Defence Minister are not starting from scratch, Greg.
No, that's right. So Prime Minister Albanese has had very active, ongoing, serious, proactive involvement in this whole process, and obviously so is Richard Marles, the Defence Minister. I know Angus Houston pretty well, and I think he's one of the great Australians, and he's not given to overstatement. He was a fantastic Chief of the Defence Force, told the truth to the Howard government about children overboard, which they didn't like to hear, but they promoted him anyway. And he has said this is the most dangerous and perilous strategic circumstance in his lifetime. He's a man in his mid-70s. He's not given to overstatement. So I think his assessment of this report is absolutely right. We've got one chance now. We are an undergunned, undermanned, underfunded defence force. The nuclear subs are a long, long way away. Whatever we can do in the next 10 years emerges out of this Defence Strategic Review and the will of the Albanese government to implement it.
And you go from this major strategic update through to what you just touched on there, another important direction to be detailed within weeks, that being the nuclear submarine option.
That's right. So I think at this stage the government is making its final decision on an 18-month study, but I think we can say that it's all ready to go. My guess is that Prime Minister Albanese will travel to Washington when the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is there, and it'll be a three-way AUKUS summit with Biden, Sunak and Albanese. The mail seems to be that we'll get some version of the British Astute nuclear attack submarine, maybe the next iteration. It'll be a joint design development between Britain and Australia, probably. The Astute is not as powerful as Virginia, but it suits us better because it's a bit smaller and a bit more manageable for us. Now, this is hugely important, and everything that happens under AUKUS is very, very important. But the truth is, I don't think we'll get a sub, an actual sub that we can really use, probably until 2038. We might get a training sub from the Americans in the meantime, but all the other technical and defence exchange under AUKUS will be hugely important right away.
Is that even if we get, say, the first one or two off the production line of a new type of British sub? If that were to happen, they've got the capability in Cumbria, I believe. So could that not mean maybe by 2030, early 2030s?
Well, Kieran, anything is possible if Prime Ministers decide it. But as I understand it, this will be a new design. So the Brits themselves have come to the end of the life of building new Astutes. So this will be a new design which will be an evolution of the Astute. So unless they were going to build us a sub that was sort of, you know, last year's version, so to speak, we're going to do a design together and we'll want some slightly different things. We want an American combat system and so forth. So that means probably a new design or an evolved design. That's probably going to take 6 or 7 years in itself. And then it takes you 7 or 8 years to build a nuclear submarine. They're the most complex artefacts that the human race has ever devised. So I think that means quite a long time. The only way we can get one earlier is if the Brits or the Americans give us one out of their line of service, which would be basically a training vessel. But within that, we will still be cooperating on hypersonics, unmanned underwater vehicles, missiles, a million other things under AUKUS. And of course, AUKUS tells all our potential enemies that we are the closest possible allies to the US and the UK. So it still has significance at that level as well.
Greg Sheridan, foreign editor at The Australian, thank you. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Kieran.